Alrighty, welcome to Scattering Basics with Crew 4005. My name is Jacob Homer, and today we're going to be going over fire safety and fire starting. So first off, before we get into building our fire, we're going to be going over the safety guidelines and the leave no trace guidelines for fire. First off, this right here is a fire pit. Your fire should always be contained within a fire pit, either a portable one like this that you can take wherever you go, or one of the pre-existing fire pits that you'll often find at a campsite. The third option, if neither of those are available, is to dig a hole in the ground and make sure to keep it off to the side by the hole. You put your fire in the hole, and it should be completely safe in that hole. Then when you're done, you want to put the dirt back on top of the fire where the hole was, making sure that if there was any grass, that it's back on top. Next up is my basic catch-all rule for fire safety. Thou shalt not be stupid around or with the fire. You can check the internet. You'll probably find hundreds of videos or pictures of people being stupid with fire and getting hurt, and it leaves really nasty injuries and scars. You don't want that. Lastly, you should always be prepared. When you're making a fire, you should always make sure that you have a bucket of water on hand in case of emergencies. So that's mostly it for the fire safety and the leave no trace guidelines for fire. There's a few other leave no trace guidelines, but that's for disposing of your fire, and we'll get to that later. So, next part is that there are three components to building a fire. First off, we have fuel. Now there are different types of fuel. There's tinder, which is your fire starter, like this lint, paper, dead grass. This is sisal rope. You can kind of unravel it and pull it apart, and it's very fibrous, and something that you want to do with your tinder most times is to, once you work with it enough, you then kind of ball it together, and then you make a bit of a bowl out of it. This is what we call a nest. You can do this with a lot of different types of fire starters or tinder. You can do it with sisal rope. You could do it with this dead grass I've got. You could even do it with newspaper if you want, though it tends to not want to stay in that bowl shape. But if that's the case, then you can also just use your paper and crumple it up into these loose balls. Next, we have kindling. Kindling is those little small bits that aren't your fire starter, but rather the little pieces that get the fire going. This is a hollow tube-like plant, kind of like a reed. It grows natively here in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And because it's hollow, even these big pieces, they light very quickly because there's a lot of air going through. Now, some other examples of some kindling is you could also use newspaper or dry grass or leaves or pine cones. Pine cones work well, or the pine needles. Those also work well. Basically anything small that's going to light pretty easily. And then after you use your kindling, we get to our sticks and logs. Now I'm not going to be using any logs today because I don't need the fire to go on that long. But if you want the fire to last long, then you need those larger fuel sources. Now of course, you start off with your smaller sticks and you increase in size as the fire gets bigger. Second component is the heat or the spark. There are a few different ways to provide this. First off, you have your usual lighter, your click lighter. It's pretty simple. Most people, pretty much everyone knows how to use it. The second method is flint and steel. Now, I'm not going to show that because I'll be honest, I'm a bit rusty with my flint and steel, haven't used it in a while. But it's a good skill to have, especially if you're in a more survival scenario, or if you find yourself that your lighter has either run out of fuel or your matches have, or your matchbox is empty. Then of course the last method is matches. Now there's also a trick that you can use. Say if you're using matches and you're out in the middle of the wilderness, or at your campsite, and it's going to be a while, it would be a really long drive to go out and get another box of matches, and you're starting to run low. Well, one trick that you can use is something we call the one match method. Now, this piece of paper I'm using for this is a bit big. You could use a smaller piece, but it'll get the point across. Essentially, I'm going to go ahead and put my tinder in here. So, what it is you basically, this is called the one match method. You use one match. Come on. And you use it to light the paper, and it becomes a sort of pseudo torch that you can then use to light your fire. And basically what it does is it just becomes an extra large match. So now that we've started that, I'm going to go ahead and add some kindling. Yeah, that hollow reed stuff tends to pop occasionally. Then you go for your small sticks. And now we get to the third component of the fire. Air. Fire needs oxygen. There are two different ways. You can either use oxygen to help get the flames to spread faster, or to help revive the fire. There are two different ways to supply oxygen to a fire. You can either get down towards the base and blow into it. Now, there are some tools called a pipe bellow. It's basically just a very long straw that you can use to you put the end, one end down towards the base of the fire and the other end by your mouth, and you just blow through it. Makes it to where you don't have to crouch down like that. The other method is get something flat. I like to use a bucket lid because I already got buckets. And you can just fan the fire. Yeah. Gonna go ahead and start adding more sticks. And it's one of those things you just need to be patient with the fire. Give it some help when it needs it, but for the most part it's let the stuff that you've put on the fire light, then once it's lit you can add more until you're about at the size that you want it to be. Now, this is about as far as I'm going to go for today, because I'm doing this for teaching purposes. I don't need a large fire. So now we're going to go over extinguishing our fire. Two different ways to extinguish it. You can either A, use water, or B, use some sort of soil or dirt or something like that. Something that won't burn and will smother the fire. So, the most important thing when putting out a fire is to make sure that everything is completely doused and extinguished. To do this, I would suggest kind of stirring around in your fire with another stick or something, just to try and find any spots of white ash. And if you find any white spots of ash, just kind of dunk it in the water, or if you need, pour more water on top of it. This is, in Boy Scouts, this is what we call campfire soup. Don't eat it. It doesn't taste good. Lastly, we get to our last leave no trace guidelines. Fire disposal. There are a couple ways to dispose of your fire. First off, if you use the third method of containing your fire, which was to dig a hole, you can actually leave your ashes in the hole. Now, I would suggest taking your now extinguished sticks and putting them to the woods once they're completely out. The sticks are good for the environment, and if other people find them, then since they're charred or charcoaled, they'll light a bit easier. And second method is, if you're using a fire pit like this, sometimes it's okay to leave the sticks in there for like the next person, but generally it's best to, once everything is completely out and is no longer hot, take it out into the woods, probably about 20 or so feet away from any water and from any campsites, and dump your ash and your sticks into the woods. Again, once they're completely out. The ash is actually good for the environment, and so are the charred sticks. The last method is that you could have a secondary bucket or a bag of some sort to put your charred remains of fire, and then you can take it back home with you. I normally wouldn't suggest doing this. I'm not really sure what you would do with it once you bring it home, other than dispose of it in one of the other two methods, but some places may not want you putting your fire remnants in the woods. It's generally good for the environment, but some places are cautious, very cautious, about not wanting to start a forest fire. Well, that covers everything for fire safety and fire building. Goodbye. Don't burn yourselves.